Hello, everybody. Welcome to OpenCV Weekly. I'm Satya Malik, and I'm the CEO of OpenCV. Today, we have with us Dr. Eric Poehler from University of Massachusetts, Amherst. And this is going to be a fascinating, really interesting episode today because he works in archaeology and he has applied computer vision to the field of archaeology. He has been mapping spaces using computer vision technology. So I'm very excited because when we say that AI is like electricity, it is going to transform multiple industries and multiple research fields. This is exactly what we mean. So we will hear how he has been able to use computer vision and AI in his own field. But before we go to Eric, let me introduce you to Phil Nelson, who actually doesn't need any introduction. He runs this show, and I just want to welcome him. If anything goes wrong, it's his fault.
Yes, thank you, Satya. That's true for everybody listening out there. It's usually my fault, usually. Good morning, everyone. It is I, the second banana who is second to none, the co-host with the co-most, your plus one and only Phil Nelson, and I'm here to remind you of a couple things we do every single week here on OpenCV Weekly, the first of which is a special giveaway to you in the audience. Stay tuned for that later in the episode. You will have the opportunity to win the OpenCV course of your choosing by answering a trivia question. Stick around for that. We're also taking questions and answers. We'll be giving answers to you in the audience using the Zoom Q&A functionality or the chat on wherever you're watching us, if it's Twitch, LinkedIn, YouTube, whatever. Ask your questions during the show and we'll do our best to bring them up in the flow of conversation. And if not, we reserve some time at the end of the episode to get to those that we did not get to. Satya?
Great. So welcome to the show, Professor Eric Poehler. It's great to have you here. And now it's your show. Please introduce yourself and we can then start with the presentation.
Morning.
Hey, thanks everybody. This is great. So let me first kind of get myself squared away and organized. First, thanks for the invitation from Phil, from Satya, from OpenCV. It's a real great opportunity to get to talk kind of beyond my normal audience in a certain way. Which always makes one a little nervous, but it also comes with a lot of excitement and I think shared benefit to have a different audience to react to the things that we're working on, and then to learn from those folks out there. So who am I? My name's, as has been mentioned, Eric Poehler. I'm a Roman archaeologist. I'm a professor of classics at UMass Amherst. And I'm interested in a number of different things around the world, particularly of the Romans, though I work in Greece as well in the Roman period. Most of my research has been focused on Roman architecture. So you'll see a little bit from a project called the Pompeii Quadraporticus project during this presentation. And then also working at Pompeii on what I would call kind of architectures of infrastructure, both kind of hard infrastructures, meaning the physical objects that allow urban life to go in a measured and kind of organized way. And then, of course, the much more difficult to recover archaeologically, the soft infrastructures, the human beings, the rules, the regulations that also inhabit those spaces. And unlike the rocks that return from the ground and remain in the world with us, these soft infrastructural pieces are missing. The particular example I can offer you is a book that I wrote on the traffic systems in Pompeii and how you can tell which way a cart was going down each street and how they organized their traffic on one-way streets by driving on the right and even shifting that traffic system over time. The project I really want to talk about today, though, is a project I share with a number of people, particularly Dr. Stephen Ellis at the University of Cincinnati, who's been my co-partner. He's the overall director of this site, and I'm the assistant director at a place called Pharos. And this is in Western Sardinia. I'm going to show you that here in a moment as I advance my slides. Here we go. And here's that site. So Pharos is a photogenic site. It is a really remarkable place.
That's an understatement.
and
wow.
And I hope to really kind of enthrall you with some of that, because it's not beside the point. These are remarkable places in antiquity, and then as ruins, they become kind of remarkable places in our modern world. They live with us now as a different thing than they ever were, but they're just as kind of compelling as they ever were in the past. But despite all this excitement, promise of computer vision, technology, and other things, I still am a university professor. So I'm going to give you just the quick overview of what I want to talk about over the next 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so. And that is, I want to just give you a quick introduction to our site, what it is, where it is, and what our project is looking to get out of our study there. I want to just give a little bit of a background, a little bit of our bona fides, perhaps, on working with 3D modeling technologies in the field, take a quick tour of our 3D processes, and then although the slides are few, the really important aspect of this is the impacts that adopting 3D technologies has around the practice of archaeology, and I'm going to describe that in what I'm calling both upstream and downstream effects, kind of things both that affect us as archaeologists in the field, and then what happens to our projects and products that we make. All right. So first, let's figure out where we are and our project and our goals. We are an archaeological project working at a site in Western Sardinia. So let's first figure out where that is. Off the west coast of Italy, there is one of the largest islands. I think it's the second largest island, perhaps third. I'm forgetting. Sorry, Cyprus, if I'm kicking you out. That's Sicily's bigger. Here on the west coast, there's a great big thing called the Bay of the Gulf of Oristano on the west coast there. And as we begin to zoom in, you can see that there's a little nub sticking down from the top of this peninsula coming all the way down. And I hope that you can see my cursor here, my pointer, in which right in this area on the bay side, which is also the leeward side or the less windy side, is of this importance part of the Western Mediterranean. One of the things I wanted to do then is just to give you a glimpse of what our site looks like by giving you what we would have called maybe the most exciting technology of 2019 or 2017, 2018, when we first started scouting for our first excavation season in 2019, which is the drone. And the drone has really given us quite an opportunity to see this site. So here is our archaeological project trailer for the Tharos Archaeological Research Project from the University of Cincinnati. This just gives you a chance to zoom over the site, to see some of the architectures, the open spaces, to walk with Sid Evans here across the site, and to see the dramatic landscape in which this city once inhabited. Of course, we were very excited to bring this to the public. As you see, the remaining text here lets us know we're a little out of date on that. But since that time, and I'm going to zoom forward here to the next slide. Since that time, we've had two other excavation seasons. Obviously, 2020 didn't happen. We were able to bring a small team in 2021. And then this summer in 2022, we had a full, in fact, even larger excavation season. Why, you might ask, are we here besides just these really lovely scenes and beautiful parts of the world? And by the way, the food is amazing. Why are we here? We're here because this has been a place of interest for people living in the Mediterranean for a very, very long time. On the site, there is a neurologic settlement. That's a late Bronze Age settlement that goes back into maybe 1300 BCE and is part of the indigenous populations of the site. Around the 9th century sometime, between 900 and 800 BCE, people from the Near East, from Phoenician people from as you would say, Tyre or somewhere along the Levantine coast, came to this area, and then their colonists later, in the 6th century, the Carthaginians came and settled and built a city here. Yeah. I was just building up to the big event here, which is that the Carthaginians, who from the 6th century run this town until a massive war, kind of the first great European world war between Carthage and Rome occurs, in which Carthage will lose this war and Sardinia will be one of the prizes that Rome takes over. Around the year 200, this city becomes Roman and will remain such until sometime the city's demise after about 500 or 600 CE. We're not sure exactly of the time of its demise. It's actually one of the things we're there to study. So what are we there to get at with this history? Well, part of it is to understand how a town that was once part of one empire becomes a town, and what happens during its transformation into being a town in another empire. I like to take the example of my son, who's 13 years old, and I like to think of him maybe a little younger, so it might be a little bit more kind of dramatic and confusing. Just thinking of him as transplanted back in time, and me coming to him and saying, "Listen, we lost the war to the Romans, and I don't know what's going to happen, but something's going to happen." And archaeologically speaking, we can now begin to understand that story, which is perhaps very little happened in the first few generations. As we can see, not a lot of trading patterns changed, not a lot of building technologies changed, not a lot of dishware changed at that time. There were imports, but we didn't see a kind of rapid transformation of the population. So that child probably grew up knowing that the political and maybe some of the social conditions changed, but not so much of it. And it was not until his grandchildren, his granddaughter or great-granddaughter, that they finally felt that they were no longer perhaps Punic people fully, but maybe now at least Romanized. And so we do this research in order to tell something of the story of how a city transforms from one social group to another, and how the identities of people, as reflected in their materials, how that transforms as well. Lastly, I'll say that we're also interested in how the city dies. We have a number of areas of, particularly if you look here up on the hill where all this grassland is, the small shrubs, that's areas that have been never excavated before, including this area down here as well. Never been excavated. We don't know what's below those areas. And so there's a lot of information about how a city falls apart, is its pieces taken away, and then finally becoming buried underneath soil and trees.
Sorry, my Roman history is very, very shaky, but who's the emperor at this time? Caligula? Or, what's the time frame?
So at the time frame, so we're 200 years before the empire begins. The Roman Empire begins. So it's a republic. In truth, it's still a republic. But on the other hand, it is an extremely aggressive, expansionary republic, right? So it's we would consider, I think we by our mores would consider them to be a very much an imperialistic state, even though their internal form of government is more democratic than it will become later when it's under an actual person called an imperator. So that's maybe a distinction for a difference if you're at the other end of a sword.
Yeah.
Great question. Thank you for that. And I appreciate the clarification ones that need to come across like that. I just wanted to very briefly say that, so what we're doing in the field is we're trying to capture this information, but we have a responsibility to kind of capture the nitty-gritty of what we do as well. And so one of the best ways to do that in today's modern world is actually to use 3D modeling and use some of the computer vision techniques that are much more easily available and commercially available. We started doing this a long time ago. Back in 2011, I was working on a project, which you see here from the Quadriporticus project that I directed again with Stephen Ellis. And we were contacted by Autodesk by someone with an amazing title called the Technology Evangelist. And they were bringing to us this early release of the product that eventually became 1Do3D Catch. It was called Project PhotoFly at the time. And it was the competitor to what I think Microsoft had called Silverlight or something like this at an early stage as well. And you can see that, it allowed us to walk into rooms, to fly through the walls, to get something of the sense of the shape and the experience of a site. And for something that was, made more than 10 years ago, commercially made more than 10 years ago, it was a really interesting product. I'll make some comparisons with it later, but by the mid-teens, we were working with different technologies here in the Quadriporticus, but also on the streets of Pompeii. Is the images from our structure sensor, a technology that actually applies itself out to the exterior of an iPad, and then uses the computing power of the iPad itself to create this 3D model. It had limitations. It had limitations of distance and strength. It also couldn't compete with the sun in its V1 model, so you had to wait till the sun went down or work in indoor areas. Those were always a challenge for us, archaeologically speaking, but the Mark II that they came out with solved a number of those problems, but unfortunately for them, Apple has kind of gone and eaten their lunch by putting LiDAR right on the iPad. And here you see our colleague, Alison Emerson, who's a professor at the Tulane University, who's running a new project in Pompeii. Her project is using the LiDAR capture enabled right on the iPad to make these kinds of 3D models, which is a really interesting transformation, and it's different from how we've been doing it. And we're gonna see what those differences are in the near future, and which of these technologies, whether it's an onboard hardware or a more software-based approach. I just put up, excuse me, on the further right, the same 10-year-old, the 11-year-old previous, actually 12-year previous story on Apple when we brought the iPad in 2010 into the field, and just what a difference the iPad Gen 1 is to what we have today with the iPad Pro for something like field work in archaeology. I could talk to you for a very long time about the iPad in particular, but I'll move on to talk about the next thing that we began, which is photogrammetrical reconstructions inside Pompeii, looking at using in this case, I think this is a remnant of our PhotoFly 123D catch, or it might be one of our early Agisoft, what was it called before that, PhotoScan, before it became Metashape, which it is today. I want to just shift quickly here to this version of the model. And I think you can see it here on the screen. I see it on the screen there. What I wanted to do is just go to the live model, because it helps. It's something I built to try to explain to people why 3D models are really valuable and important as archaeological products, not just flash, not just fun spin around things, but actual things that have actual utility. And I wanted to hit people with that utility at very basic and simple levels. So I'm just going to use the actual annotation function here in Sketchfab to show what we mean. So for example, why is this a valuable object to have over other things? Well, guess what? It's a product of maybe 50 to 200 to sometimes 500 photographs. And just as a file system, as an organization of those photographs, it is much more intuitive and much more useful. And so I have a link here. You could go to this and actually see this as like a web folder, much less useful. It provides us the opportunity to do the impossible, right? To get at visual angles that are important for our use, that would be impossible in the real world. We could never get a camera 15 feet below the ground. Not that we necessarily need one in this example, but it does provide that. Quickly then, right? It gives us a sense of the space, because we can walk inside and we can feel what it's like to have that wall behind us, rather than just having that screen behind us in other areas. There's a number of other pieces here, but I wanted to just start out with that by showing you that there are ways in which you can use 3D models, and then I usually kind of end with, and by the way, it's a pretty interesting pedagogical technique, as I've just shown you right now. So it's good for teaching. Let me go back to the main slides here.
Actually, I would like to add that, Professor Richard Feynman, he once said that a lot of problems in physics and science in general will be solved if you could visualize what we are trying to solve, right? If you could see things, right? Like if you could see electrons, it solves a bunch of problems. And biology, if you could see the protein macromolecules and things like that, you solve a lot of problems, right? Right. And this is, in similar sense, very important, not just to see photographs, but see it, how humans visualize it, actually on the premise, right? On the so I completely agree. I mean, these have, and frankly, once these modalities are created, the next generation of students, they will use it in ways that we don't imagine yet, right? We have a certain way of looking at 3D, but they may come up with other visualization techniques, which will be new, fresh, and completely blow us away. So I really like this.
Thanks. And you remind me that one of my favorite kind of tropes as well is biological, which is that, you know, as biological entities, we have millions of years of evolution in the connection between our visual senses and our processing unit, which is our brain. And unlike so many other ways of understanding information, like you could probably close your eyes right now and walk to the nearest bathroom just because you have all that visual information in your head, and it allows you to do these kinds of things that you couldn't do if it was if you had to trace it across some table or something like that. And
Right.
so leveraging what we've been evolved to do, which is to understand our physical relationships to space, if we can add in one more variable, which is repositioning that visual information as archaeological evidence, and then considering it within that frame, we don't have to, you know, as you say, elevate the problem to an abstraction, live with the abstraction. We can live in the simulacrum of the things that we're comfortable with.
Right. I have another story from undergrad. I got somehow interested. I learned about this thing called differential gears that people, you know, that are used on the back axle of cars, etc., so that it can rotate. And I mean, I just heard about it. I went to the library, read a bunch of. It took me 3-4 hours to understand what's a differential gear, and that too, I was very shaky whether I had understood it correctly. And then many years later on YouTube, you know, 2 or 3 years back, I see this animation of differential gear. And it is like, oh God, this is so easy to understand when you show it as an animation. It's nothing, you know, it's obvious once you show. And I read through, you know, through that text and, you know, those diagrams, which were 2D, you know, not even full diagrams, right? They were just made using lines, etc. So it was much more easy, much more intuitive to just see an animation. You don't need any explanation. You see that animation, it's obvious, right? And the same thing will happen with many other areas as well.
Yeah, and maybe one to bring it to the humanities. I mean, one of the real questions that people and concerns people have about these technologies is that they are replacing human beings from a labor point of view and from a skill point of view, and I'll say something about that later. But also that they are kind of taking over for us in ways that are making us less intelligent, right? Because they take over the thinking for us. And I think what we're saying here is that we're bending the technology towards what is useful for us. Where we already are is where we're making these technologies go, so that we can effectively use them best. Because bending us to the technology is a lot harder.
Right. Yeah, that argument is, it's funny because, I mean, if you think about it, when books were invented, they took away the memorization to a large extent, right? So earlier books or stories were transmitted from one generation to another by rote memorization. Somebody would tell the story and the other person would try to remember the whole thing, right?
Oral tradition.
Oral tradition, that's right. But of course, now at that time, people would have developed these memory skills, which we don't have today. But do we actually want that, right?
Yeah.
Do we actually want to go back to that skill that is lost? I think we are better off having lost that skill and having books instead.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, one of the next things I'll talk about is just a process that we go through for this. So some people won't be familiar with this process. I think a number of people on this call will probably know a good bit about how photogrammetrical techniques work. And so I won't go into the details of that, but rather to kind of express what it's like from an archaeological point of view, which is, for us, the question is, how do we document the things that we find, and how do we create that in kind of the greatest visual fidelity, but then also in the greatest kind of maybe even geographical fidelity, which is, how do we put this mostly like the real world thing in as close to its real world position as possible. So the first thing that we end up doing is actually going to the site, getting the real world coordinates, whether that's through a GPS unit or what we did previously using a laser theodolite to measuring to known points, or what we've done in the future, we've done most recently, which is, since we've already begun this process of creating a grid with known points, we now are using a drone to actually stitch together images. We're using more kind of computer vision to then find the next location. And so we don't need as many of these other hardware pieces to do this. But what we do is we lay out a grid of known points with targets all around the site. And as you saw in the last image, the targets are on the ground so that a drone can see them. And then also so that a human being who's going to take the photographs can see them as well. But not always is it easiest to have the targets flat on the ground. And what you're seeing here is an example where we've actually wedged a nail between the stones with a small skink here for scale. And we have a vertically placed target on the wall as well, which helps our operators actually produce the most recognizable locations inside of our captures. What does a capture look like? Let's see if we can get this to start. It looks a little bit like this in time lapse. So here you see one of our folks going around the entire outline of our trench area. He's not focused only on the trench. He's capturing that larger environment because, again, this is about not just documenting the one thing we just dug, but to understand it in the fullness of context of space of all the other things. Now, Patrick is getting in tighter. He's moving around, getting the detail shots that are necessary for the model, making sure that we have all those pieces, and then he runs inside here. I have another version of this video in which the audio is Yakety Sax, or the theme from Benny Hill, which is absolutely hilarious. But we haven't put it out there for this version, not least for the audio problems we've had so far.
Speaking of being able to visualize things, I'm laughing.
Yep. But what's important about this is that, unlike a lot of other capture technology or capture circumstances, we need to capture at the time that our objects are found or strata are found. We can't wait for the sun to go down. We can't produce shade or the absence of it through lighting. We have to deal with the conditions that we have. And so that's one part of the impediments or the imperfections that we have. But the other thing I want to point out, when you look at this image of Patrick having now gone back to the tent, notice there's no other human beings in sight. And that's because we want to have a matching landscape without people that can just focus on the archaeology. But that means that all of our excavators are idle, right? And so this is one of the impacts that I'm going to return to, is that this process produces reactions elsewhere. Let's see, we already got that. Once those pictures are taken, here you can see our team sitting down inside the tent and bringing those photographs together into a dedicated computer, and then visualizing those results at the very most basic level. So what we would just call sparse cloud. And that's enough for us to be able to say, yes, we have enough imagery, we have enough points of connection here to be able to say we've got the model that we need. Because otherwise, we would spend hours and hours running that model, and we wouldn't be allowing our people to get back in. So
right.
Yeah.
We also have this little process as well, which is
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you don't mind. There was a pattern that you showed a few slides back. I didn't recognize. It's embarrassing. I don't recognize that kind of pattern. What kind of marker is that? The black and white.
This. Let's get the. Sorry, this guy. It's a generated pattern that comes. So Metashape has a series of preset targets, and so you can simply print this out. And they have, I think, 100 preset targets. You can modify this to be black and white or white on black, but they're enough for that. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So that is a software specific. More generally in the industry, they use Aruco markers or April tags, etc.,
Yeah.
which serve the same purpose. But I had not
Mm-hmm.
seen this specific kind of pattern.
Right. What I should point out to you is that each target that they provide is unique in its shape.
Yeah.
And that means that you can then automatically
Identify
recognize that thing. Yeah. So that helps a lot with the processing.
Got it.
I'll just return to this quickly to say that we have another process that is if we don't do what we used to do, which is stop digging, pull out the drawing boards and the tape measures and the plumb bobs and measure it on a measured board on graph paper the planimetric view that is, the traditional way of doing things in archaeology. How do we capture that? Well, we actually have a kind of 3D to GIS pipeline in which we produce this georectified orthophoto. We then import that into GIS, draw over it, and produce a standalone polygon that allows us to do things with that. I know some of our technical issues have caused us to go over time. We've been pushing time, and I don't want to run out of run out of time for questions. So I'm going to skip through two things here. These pictures. I'll just say that once we've produced the 3D models, we have not only the model but the opportunity to produce visualizations that are really, really instructive. So here you can see just very basically. Here you can see the relative depths of the excavations that we talked about. So we know when we hit the stone ground, the natural bedrock here, that we are still a little ways from it here, so we can plan our excavations. We can look over here at this wall, and we can see that it does not extend downward into the ground, and so we know that its relative sequence in the archaeological construction of this area, the architectural construction of this area, is quite different. So we can use all those things, and then we can zoom in here to see. Zoom into here to see and locate different sloping floors. So you can see the first kind of anthropogenic made floor here, sloping eastward here towards the bay, and then the first flat floor here that was then followed by other sloping floors, which is sloping towards us, so you can't actually see it in this. But I want to just bring us forward to see the 3D model from this year. I produced this really, basic image here to allow us to see this massive wall that we've excavated. Here in the slowness of our approach, you can see the part of the wall that's well constructed, and here you can see the part of the wall that's been completely damaged and blown apart. There was at some point a surface that covered it, and really, really interestingly to us, there's a small ash layer that went underneath that, and then we ran out and we left. I'll say just a couple more things, and I'll play it again just for your interest. This is a really visually arresting way to re-encounter a trench. And one of the most important things for us is not just the daily documentation, but it's a stand-in for the individual memories that we all have of what happened that day. Because very often what will happen is later on, you need to go and write this story up. You need to go and explain not only what happened, but what it means. And that can hinge upon very, very simple distinctions that people understand and remember differently. And I've been involved in a number of conversations that escalated in intensity because we, at a certain point, you have this terrible situation where you have the person who usually who did the excavating, who usually is in a lower standing in terms of kind of the standing of the project, in terms of authority, versus the dig directors who are responsible for the final product, and they may share different memories of what happened, and the decision archaeologically gets made on the memory that is attached to a certain level of authority. And we don't tend to think that's how science should really be done. But if you can stop having a different memory issue and you can start having conversations about what you can both see, that can really change things.
Yeah, it's a great way to sidestep that logical fallacy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So lastly then, just to show these slides, what are the benefits, what are the impacts of 3D models for us, and why do we want to use this technology? Well, I've already mentioned it as an interpretive tool, and it is just having dug now since 1998, almost every year, and been the side of a trench almost every year during that time, I cannot tell you what it's like to be able to re-enter a place like the 3D model provides. It is as intellectually valuable as it is visually stimulating. It is really, really, truly impressive. That's on a kind of upstream, that's kind of back in our area. It's also very, very useful producing the kind of traditional plans that we have. So we can produce a number of different plans and in a lot of different kinds of ways. So section drawings or plan drawings, we can make those very quickly. And then you can go to see our Sketchfab right now and see a couple hundred models of public 3D documentation. We can really share what's happening in our site very, very quickly. The other impacts I might call challenges. And these are the impact on the research itself. What happens in a team when you have to sit? What were once, you needed to have 5 excavators because physically you need that many people to shift the earth and to sort it and to find the finds, to deal with the finds. And then you needed to have enough people to, and kind of half the team could be drawing something, which is going to take an hour, 2 hours, maybe if it's a really, really complex thing. And then for us now, we spend 25 minutes, 30 minutes tops, capturing a 3-dimensional model. It means all of our excavators can now be dedicated to a different task. Usually it's dealing with the interpretive questions, arguing with themselves and documenting those conversations, updating the digital database, those kinds of things, making sure that the photographs all match what's happening. So there's a real kind of efficiency benefit in that sense. It also has the impact of now requiring personnel who are dedicated to this process and who have real skills and expertise in that area. So I'm going to mention Cinzia Presti here, who's the woman in the image. She has learned not only how to run the different kinds of computers. So we have a PC in the States that we have to access and we send the files to. We have a fairly good computer in the field that we use. She needs to know how to use the cameras themselves. She needs to know how to actually traverse all the different trenches that go on. And she needs to know how to communicate the information to me, to the excavators, and to our digital post-process digital team as well. There's also in the processes here, the kind of the data flow and so if I've already kind of talked about in a certain sense, the processes and their change and interruption, there's also the question of what happens when you end up producing almost a gigabyte of data each time you make a model. And you need to process that in relatively quick order. You need to share that information. You need to have backup regimes. You need to have VPNs and clients and other things that actually produce this final data. And then what do we do with that? Think of the project as having responsibilities in the short term with maintaining and moving those data around, with the institutions that are eventually, so the University of Cincinnati here is going to be responsible for tens of terabytes of data from us by the end. And then you think about libraries and other institutions that eventually will want to be able to share and give out not only these models themselves, but the underlying data that allow people with future methods and better ways of doing this to actually maybe reproduce them in ways that aren't possible. And then finally, just thinking, what are the downstream challenges? My gosh, I'm so lucky to be able to be a part of a process that makes these really visually stimulating, arresting, and valuable 3D models. And then when I go publish, I make a 2D plan. And that is both because the expectation for my discipline, the way to express the evidence that I have and to share it to people who are trained to understand 2-dimensional plans, who are trained to understand information in that format. This is the format I need to give it to them, and because otherwise they might not believe me. The other part is, how do you embed a 3D model in a journal, in a book? Because even as they are made inside of digital technologies, and even though you might encounter that article as a PDF, as a digital environment, it is not easy to either, one, simply embed and enclose a 3D model into that, and certainly much more challenging is the integration of the 3D model, such that it becomes as valuable an illustration as you would want it to be. So we still have a lot of challenges to work out, both on the side of the project that helps us understand what it is that we get out of this, what benefit comes back to us. And I'll just say, the one thing that we still haven't figured out is how to share this data in close enough to real time back to our team to help it not just with the later interpretive questions, but in the real time, help us make decisions about the next thing to dig, where to dig, and if we might change course over the course of that summer. And then downstream, how do we actually make these things? How do we encourage those with other responsibilities to change their ways? And just lastly, how do we get people whose publication projects, whose regimes rely on not only these formats, but on the legitimacy of those formats, right? And the kind of social value that comes with a print publication. So this is the challenges for us. And I'm very excited to take your questions. I'm sorry for the delays that kind of made this a bit choppy, but this has been a great thing to try to begin to talk about with you all. So thanks.
That's really awesome.
Thank you.
I love the presentation. So I really like how much you have to think about the human element and not just the science of the whole project, right? So that people can collaborate easily. That's quite interesting to see. And I also wanted to add one more little story, right? The way you described the purpose of the project, that's also very interesting. Again, when I was in grad school, we were working on cryo-electron microscopy. One of my friends, this was like 3 a.m. in the morning, and and I was drinking some coffee to finish some work that I had, and I said that, look, 50 people are going to see what we have written, right? This will go into the journal, and there are like 50 people working in this cryo-electron microscopy field. So we are writing this thing. We are doing all this hard work for 50 people, right? And he just stood up and said, we are changing the resolution at which truth can be perceived, because we were working on 3D reconstruction of macromolecules, right? So he says, we are changing the resolution at which truth can be perceived. I said, this is 3 a.m. and this person is so jacked up. I better get my act together. So I just, got down to work. So purpose and meaning, it really, once, the basic economics of your life are taken care of, purpose and meaning is what drives people to the large extent. Yeah.
Great point. Excellent story. Yeah. Let's go ahead and do our giveaway here before we hit 10 o'clock. So if you're just joining us or you need a reminder, one of the things we do here every week is a giveaway to you in the audience. I'm going to ask a trivia question based on the presentation by our guest, Eric Poehler, and you will answer that question here in the Zoom chat. The first person to answer that question correctly will win the OpenCV course of their choosing. So get ready to answer in the Zoom chat window. Earlier in the episode, we talked about how these captures are actually made, and we showed a marker from some of the software that was used to capture that. It wasn't Taruko, it was a different kind. What was the name of that software that was seeing that marker?
Oh, Bhaskar got it.
Bhaskar, you're right there. The answer was Metashape. Congratulations, Bhaskar. Please send one email to phil@opencv.org with the course you would like to get access to, and we'll make sure that the courses team hooks you up. So yeah, we've got a couple of good questions here in Zoom. Thanks everybody for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. I am going to spend 5 hours editing this episode probably, but hey, the show must go on. Martin Niehoff would like to know, are you also, or has anybody tried using these models you've created, Eric, for VR and AR purposes, or are they mostly just used for visualization in browsers or settings like that?
So we have actually begun to explore looking at it in VR. The first two trenches that we did are all set inside of Sketchfab right now, with the avatar set at ground level, so that someone could natively go in and begin to use that model in VR.
Very cool.
It's interesting. We haven't done it, and people ask that question, and I say, well, the big reason why is that most of the time when those models are really the most valuable to us, we have the benefit of actually having the trench.
Sure,
we have not only the we have actual reality there. Right. And so it becomes something of much more value kind of beyond the project. We recognize that, and so we began, when producing these things for public consumption, creating them so that they're fresh out of the box, they're ready to go to a VR headset.
Well, yeah, and you said you use Sketchfab for a lot of these as well, and I know they have some integrations that they do with, like, Unreal Engine and things like that. Mm-hmm. So it could be interesting. I in my brain I was just thinking it'd be really fun to have a video game platformer character kind of scaled down and running and jumping around these things, climbing up. It'd be fun to create an experience like that. Let's see, Bhaskar, our winner, our trivia winner today, would like to know, are hollow geometries like caves not visible from surfaces captured in the 3D model? When you're doing like cutouts like this, I think is the question.
I'm not entirely sure I follow the question. I would say that, I don't know if my stomach is coming through the audio here.
Is it lunchtime?
It's lunchtime out here in the East Coast, people. So if you were inside of a 3D environment, it would be very much like the room that I showed from Pompeii, I think, where you should be able to project the things. Bhaskar, I'm not sure I'm fully capturing the answer to your question.
I think the question is, there could be geometries where the camera cannot reach, right? And does that cause artifacts that then it's not a reliable measure of truth?
It's hard to know how, like if what you're seeing is the full truth or not, I guess is the
So the two things I would say there are, one, it is always the case that you're going to have some small corner in the the abstract geometry, the irregular geometries that trenches produce. Even though you try to dig them with some semblance of Euclidean space to them, they actually are always got these little holes. There are native hole filling processes.
Unless, of course, you're at the Mountains of Madness, in which case the geometry is non-Euclidean.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And the thing, so we've had issues where basically the false alignments are quite obvious. So we'll have a photograph that produces all of its images on a plane, and that plane will just be slicing across our model. And it's quite clear that is producing some false information. We also tend to get, you can set the tolerance in some of the technologies and allow that to be more aggressive or less aggressive in its filtering and interpolation as it fills in the gaps between the smaller pieces.
Right. Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. We've got quite a few people wondering here across several of our services, how do they find these models on Sketchfab? Oh,
so sketchfab.com/UC Tharros, THARROS. So right. UC
We will make sure to put this link in the show notes when we get this version uploaded on YouTube next Tuesday morning. So thanks for that question, Kevin and E here in Zoom. Michael Block would like to know, how have you found using the LiDAR on the iPad in terms of, have you done many tests with just using the LiDAR on the iPad versus some of these other more involved methods?
Our project hasn't done that much with it, and partially that's because we've invested so much in terms of personnel and processes in the terrestrial capture. our lab-based team has done more with that.
Mm.
I don't.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I don't have a. I'll just say I don't have a good enough knowledge of the experience to really help say something important or meaningful on that.
Yeah, it makes sense. If the old saying, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." Once you've got a nice process in place. Obviously, it's always adapting and changing, but you don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to use another Americanism there.
Let me just say, I always hate it when speakers don't answer my question. So let me try to say one more thing about that. We have captured for a different project an inscription that was in a museum using the iPhone LiDAR. Mm-hmm. And the things I will say is that for object-based captures, rather than kind of area-based captures, it's clear that these are really, really powerful technologies, not least because they are integrated in very common hardwares. The softwares are easily available on the App Store. And then there are galleries and sharing methods that make that exportable and then shareable very, very easily. So if there's a future, it may already be that direction. In the same way that there were tablet computers before the iPad came out, and there still remain that. But there is one Band-Aid, even though there are other self-adhesive bandages.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Adhesive medical strips. Yeah, we're just a little bit past the hour here. Satya, we got any news, any updates that we want to impart on the good people here before we call it a show?
No big news, I think. No.
So I have one thing, which is so we are so unfortunately this is not being broadcast on LinkedIn, which is our other biggest network because of the way their streaming thing. It's not very robust. Anyway, those of you who are still here in the Zoom audience are going to get a leg up on the next contest that we're launching on Monday, which is called the OpenCV AI Scavenger Hunt. Using OpenVino and some generated AI images, you will be solving puzzles every Monday for 4 weeks, and you'll get a chance to win a share of $6,000 in prizes, with prizes being given out every week for people who participate and correctly solve the riddle. So to join that, I'm going to give you the inside scoop. You can go to opencv.org/AI, OpenCV AI Scavenger Hunt. I'm going to post the link here in the chat. So the only way you can get these clues and the only way you can win is to sign up there. You will be emailed these images every Monday, and we'll post the answers the following week so people can see what they missed or whatnot. But go check it out. It's another thing being brought to you by our friends at Intel, specifically OpenVino, and it's going to be a lot of fun. In fact, you will be able to win an actual merit badge for OpenCV AI Scavenger Hunt. So take a look at that.
And of course, there are prizes.
Yes, $6,000 in prizes. Every week we'll be giving, I think every week it'll be about $100 just to make sure that people have a chance if they don't solve all of them. At the end, if you participate for all 4 weeks and get them correctly, you will have a chance to win either $5,000 if you're the only one that does it. If 2 people do it, it will be $2,500. It'll be a top 3 at most, and we'll go based on who gave the best correct answer, meaning how complete the answer was. So please go check that out. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. Yeah, Satya, you want to take us?
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. The scavenger hunt idea that you basically there's a clue and you actually solve the clue by running inference on some of the images and then piecing everything together.
That's right.
It's going to be very interesting. So please sign up on that link, and we will see how it goes.
And it is free to play.
It's free to play, right? With lots of prizes.
Yes.
So I just want to conclude by saying big thank you to Professor Eric Poehler. This was a fascinating episode. I really enjoyed it. And, so did our audience. And as always, I want to thank Phil for organizing this. He takes care of everything. Thank you. And lastly, I want to thank our audience for the patience and everything, because, things did not go very smoothly today, but you are there for us, and we will keep bringing you very high quality content and very high quality people who will share their experiences, and we'll learn together how computer vision and AI is changing the world. This episode, for example, was illuminating for me as well. So it's really good. Thank you.
Yeah, take care of yourselves out there, folks. Take care of somebody else if you can. Have a great day wherever you may be, and we will see you next Thursday with our guest Paula Ramos of Intel, who will be another one of our OpenCV AI competition success stories. She was a part of that big Intel Getty launch, in fact, this week at Intel Innovation. So we'll see you then. Operator, can we get that sweet, sweet outro music by the Monster Association?
Thank you, guys.
Whew! All right, that was sure an episode of this show, huh? Thanks so much, Eric. We'll you're the only one that I'm not mad at right now. No, I'm kidding. You did great, and we'll post-mortem this and figure it out on the tech side. But hey, that's what we get for being on the cutting edge. Sometimes you get cut. All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks so much for watching this episode of the webinar. Please hit that like button, subscribe, and don't forget to tap the little bell icon to be notified when new episodes drop. This week's episode was brought to you by OpenCV Courses. Learn computer vision and AI from the best at opencv.org/courses. If you'd like to be in the audience next week, subscribe to the OpenCV newsletter.